Subcommittee on National Security will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Inspectors General play an important role in ensuring accountability in executive branch agencies, and whistleblowers are a key tool in combating waste, fraud, and abuse within government. But IGs have a responsibility to conduct investigations in a fair, timely, and accountable manner, and whistleblower complaints cannot be used to shield a civilian or military member from accountability for substandard performance. The recent case of Rear Admiral Brian Losey, who was forced to end his stellar career as a Navy SEAL after a lengthy series of IG investigations and political maneuvering, raises significant questions regarding the IG process, the erosion of military command authority, and the treatment of an officer who gave so much for our country. Losey's 30-year career sent him all around the globe to defend our nation. The habitual deployments as a junior officer, going to Afghanistan shortly after the 9/11 attacks, serving multiple deployments in Iraq, commanding the famed SEAL Team 6. His final duty assignment was to serve as the commander of WARCOM, which oversees all Navy SEALs. Retired Admiral and Navy SEAL William McRaven has written that Losey is, quote, "without a doubt one of the finest officers with whom I have ever served. Over the past 15 years, no officer I know in the SEAL teams has given more to this country than Brian Losey," end quote. There are very few Americans who have given as much to our country as Brian Losey. Yet, Losey's career was cut short following a flurry of lengthy investigations conducted by the DoD, IG, and intervention by a handful of U.S. senators. In 2011, Losey assumed command at the Special Operations Command Africa, SOC Africa, which was a relatively new command that was still trying to become capable of dealing with the growing threats emanating from the African continent. The command was based in Stuttgart, Germany, and the command featured a small number of staffers who had grown accustomed to the relaxed European lifestyle. Upon assuming command, Losey faced a situation in which the command was not performing at the level required. He saw a need to improve the command and change the prevailing culture. It would not necessarily be easy to do so, but it was necessary to do so. Meanwhile, an anonymous whistleblower filed a complaint against Losey, alleging that he illicitly flew his daughter to Germany at taxpayer expense. The complaint was bogus in every respect. Not only did Losey not fly his daughter to Germany on the taxpayer's dime, he was actually entitled to do so if he so chose under the existing travel regulations. Nevertheless, the existence of this complaint, combined with Losey's befuddlement regarding the complaint, cast a shadow over Losey's attempts to take action to reform SOC Africa, as he was accused of retaliating against whistleblowers who filed additional complaints as Losey undertook his actions. The Navy conducted an IG investigation and found that Losey's actions were justified on the merits and did not constitute unlawful reprisals. He subsequently earned a promotion to Rear Admiral Upper Half, a 2-star billet, and was assigned to command WARCOM. A review of the command climate commissioned by the commander of AFRICOM found that Losey was, quote, "the right man for the job at this time," end quote, and cited, quote, "pockets of resistance within the command to the new course charted by Losey." The DoD IG conducted its own investigation, included that some of Losey's actions were reprisals for the whistleblower complaint. Although the IG investigation was required by law to be concluded in 180 days, the Losey investigation, multiple investigations, dragged on for years, delaying his ascension to 2-star admiral for 2 years. The Navy reviewed the findings of the DoD IG and determined that the personnel actions initiated by Losey were not reprisals, but a legitimate exercise of command authority. A group of U.S. senators, though, rejected the Navy's findings and sought to engineer Losey's ouster. Using legislative leverage, they effectively forced the hand of the Secretary of Navy, who revoked Losey's promotion, thereby short-circuiting a storied career. This is a tragic outcome that's failed to do justice to one of America's top warriors, and the whole ordeal raises questions about how the whistleblower process functions. For one thing, the main whistleblower complaints that Losey violated travel regulations by flying his daughter to Europe and that Losey created a, quote, toxic command climate were both factually false. He paid for his daughter's trip and actually was entitled to have the trip funded by the Navy. And the AFRICOM report compiled by Lieutenant General Ray Palumbo found that SOC AFRICOM was, quote, trending along a path of improvement under Rear Admiral Losey's leadership, vision, and direction, end quote. Yet the procedural and investigator aftermath of these baseless complaints culminated in Losey losing his career. Second, the filing of false reports can undermine command authority. At a minimum, there was a dispute between the Navy and the DOGIG about whether LOCI's actions were legitimate actions undertaken by a military commander. A false IG complaint, under these circumstances, can be used as a weapon to make core command decisions a more risky proposition. Third, the years-long investigative process left Admiral LOCI in a perpetual state of uncertainty and was contrary to the 180-day mandate. Doesn't an officer who's given so much for our country deserve to have matters such as these resolved within the time frame enumerated by the law? How is the IG held accountable for consistently failing to abide by the 180-day requirement? Fourth, much was made over the course of the investigations regarding the leadership style of Brian LOCI. He certainly ruffled feathers at SOC Africa, but do we want commanders who demand too much or too little? The mark of a good commander is whether the mission gets successfully executed, not whether everyone's feelings are taken into account. Today, we will hear from several witnesses who have experience in IG investigations, including the Principal Deputy IG for the Department of Defense, Mr. Fine. We will also hear from my colleague, Ryan Zinke from Montana. Ryan is a retired Navy SEAL captain who commanded SEAL Team 6 and who has a keen understanding of the challenges facing our Special Operation Force commanders. I thank you all for attending, and with that, I will now recognize Ranking Member Lynch for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing to examine the management of the military whistleblower reprisal investigations by the Department of Defense Inspector General. And I'd also like to welcome our colleague, Mr. Zinke of Montana, and other distinguished witnesses for helping this committee with its work. I would caution that the full case of Mr. LOCI was an extensive review with about 100 witnesses, and I think 30,000 pages. So a lot of trees have died, and we have very little of the information before this committee. So I will just acknowledge and appreciate Rear Admiral LOCI's performance in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, on behalf of this country, his courageous service. I cannot pass judgment on the 100 witnesses and 30,000 pages of documentations that were put together in this investigation. And I do have enormous respect for those senators, that group of senators, Democrats and Republicans, Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, Senator John McCain of Arizona, Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island, who reviewed this and agreed to substantiate not the allegations against improper use of resources regarding flights for family. That wasn't the case here. The case at heart was whether whistleblowers who came forward with information were retaliated as a result of them coming forward. That's the core of this. And we don't have enough information before this committee to pass judgment on that. So I appreciate that what's been worked. Look, I want to do something I don't normally do, which is I want to thank the members of the Senate for their good work. I don't do that. That's probably the first time I've ever done that, but probably won't happen again. But this is a tough case, and I'll just let the facts take us where they will in that regard. We do have really an abominable case, though, with the Department of Defense Office of the Inspector General. We are in total agreement on that. We've got cases where there appears to be deliberate mishandling of documentation. You're right, Mr. Chairman, they have failed miserably in meeting the 180-day statutory requirement for informing service members of their rights and of the status of their case. Instead of 180 days, the average day over there for review is 526 days. And in that case, justice delayed is justice denied for a lot of these soldiers who come forward and report misconduct and engage in whistleblowing. So there's a lot here. There's the case of personnel at the DOD Inspector General's office backfilling evidence in files after the case is closed, which, sounds like some of the things that we have prosecuted people for and people are doing jail time for. So there's a lot to look at here. Again, I appreciate our colleague, Mr. Zinke of Montana, coming before and testifying before this committee. We really appreciate his good work. He's a great member of Congress and has done yeoman's work on this case, and I'd like to hear him and the other witnesses on this matter. And with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts. Without objection, the chair would like to introduce into the record an op-ed published by William McRaven, April 24th, 2016, A Warrior's Career Sacrifice for Politics. Without objection, so ordered. I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We will now recognize a distinguished witness on our first panel. I'm pleased to welcome Representative at Large for the state of Montana, Congressman Ryan Zinke. We thank you for your participation today. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record, and we welcome any oral remarks that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the record, I was a commander at SEAL Team 6 and retired as a commander. Good afternoon, Ranking Member, Mr. Lynch, great to see you, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on National Security. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify for you today on the important issue of the Department of Defense Office of the Inspector General's Military Whistleblower Reprisal Program. In my testimony today, I'm going to focus my attention on the DoD IG investigations of my friend and colleague, Rear Admiral Brian Losey, during his time of Special Operations Command Africa. Beginning with an anonymous complaint in 2011, the DoD IG held 5 separate investigations into accusations of reprisal against Rear Admiral Losey, which had taken more than 4 years to complete. One of these investigations involved an alleged reprisal against a suspected whistleblower under his command. During this investigation, the Office of DoD IG seemed to display a blatant mishandling and misrepresentation of evidence, both in their preliminary and final report. Following numerous witnessed accounts of misconduct by the complaint by Rear Admiral Losey and others, the security officer for Special Operations Command Africa ordered a command-directed investigation, a CDI, into the complainant's actions. During the preliminary report, the DoD IG blatantly misrepresented the CID by stating that the investigative officers completed the CDI and determined that all 10 allegations were not substantiated as alleged, a statement that was eventually proven to be completely false. The CDI found that 3 allegations were substantiated and 2 of the allegations were partially substantiated. Additionally, the CID recommended the complainant should be issued a negative referral on an officer performance report and administrative discipline. Acting on those recommendations, Rear Admiral Losey relieved the complainant of his position and reassigned him to a different position in a different geographical combatant command that he believed would be commensurate with his rank. Although the DoD IG amended their language in the final report, the DoD IG still chose to dismiss the complainants of any wrongdoing, dismiss the findings and recommendations of the CDI, and claimed that the administrative actions taken by Rear Admiral Losey constituted an act of reprisal. In reality, he was simply holding a subordinate accountant accountable for his actions following the guidance of the report. That is clear. In the same investigation, DoD IG claims, during this investigation, Rear Admiral Losey specifically accused complainant of signing 3 letters of retention for Air Force officers using an auto pen. However, this supposed accusation by Rear Admiral Losey is not found in any of the DoD IG interview transcripts. According to DoD IG, this accusation arose from an unrecorded conversation the DoD IG investigator had with Rear Admiral Losey outside of the official interview. The DoD IG should not be using unrecorded conversations as evidence that cannot be collaborated or confirmed. This is an unprecedented action and has no legal merit and is completely inappropriate behavior by the DoD IG. Over the course of 5 investigations of acts of reprisal by Rear Admiral Losey, the DoD IG was blatant violation of military law and Uniform Code of Military Justice. Title 10, U.S. Section Code 1034, clearly states the DoD IG is required to complete their investigations in 180 days or less. Unfortunately, 4 out of 5 investigations completed by the DoD IG were in complete disregard for the 180 deadline. Additionally, per Title 10, U.S. Code Section 624, an active investigation cannot hold statutory promotions up for more than 18 months. After being confirmed by the Senate for promotion, Rear Admiral Losey was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral Upper Half on April 1, 2013. On March 31, 2015, the DoD IG informed the Secretary of the Navy that Rear Admiral Losey was no longer subject to the 5th and final investigation, 1 day shy of a promotion being held up by the DoD for 24 consecutive months, far longer than the 18-month mandate. These blatant acts of violations of law by the DoD IG not only cheapen the findings of the reports, but erodes the trust the public and the military have in their government institutions. If the DoD IG lacks the ability to simply follow deadlines in investigations or use evidence that cannot be collaborated, then it raises the question as to what other laws and guidelines they simply choose to disregard during the course of their investigations. In conclusion, I would like to call upon the memo of former Secretary Chuck Hagel penned and saying central to the military justice that those involved in the process base their decisions on their independent judgment. Service members and the American people must be confident the military justice system is inherently fair and adheres to the fundamental principles and due process of law. With that, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Pursuant to unanimous consent agreement, the Congressman will answer questions posed by myself and Ranking Member Lynch, and then will be excused for his business that he has to attend to, and the Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Congressman Zinke, can you just provide the context to when Losey got to SOC Africa? People had talked about it being based in Stuttgart, Germany, and some had said that it was kind of part of the wine and cheese circuit. What does that mean, and kind of how did he approach getting the command in order?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I can tell you, in personal experience, I've known Brian Losey a long time. We served together at SEAL Team 6, and he was the Red Team lead. He is hard-charging and fair. To say that Africa Command is wine and cheese, I was stationed in Stuttgart, and I believe I was gone 250 days out of the year, primarily in Kosovo and fighting the Bosnian wars. It is an enormous responsibility of a commander at AfricaCom. It is far from wine and cheese. I would say it's an MRE and a hot rack.
In terms of as a commander, when you've seen in the Navy, I've seen it, people abuse property, there are frauds that can be committed, and so obviously those things need to be ferreted out. When you have complaints against a commander to kind of undermine that authority, if you as a commander do need to take action, but you have complaints that are baseless in your judgment but are hanging over you, will that chill your willingness perhaps to exercise your correct judgment?
You know, as a commander, you're obligated to do the right thing. You know, when you see actions that are either illegal or are not in order, you are obligated to take action, regardless of consequence. But I do think, under the circumstances, when the IG reports, don't follow the law, and there's a sense that a whistleblower has the upper edge, when a whistleblower can hide behind the law, knowing that the bureaucracy, I think there's a sense of, should I do the right thing or not? Because the consequences of doing the right thing may have a negative consequence, as what we see with Brian Losey. At the end of the day, I think it's about the sanctity of command. It's that when you are a commander, you are in charge of those underneath you, whether it's a civilian or military, and when you see something wrong, you're obligated to take a stand and take action. But when that's interfered by a bureaucracy or a different layer, which doesn't follow the law, that erodes the entire process of the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the sanctity of command.
So what are your recommendations then? Because I think that you are a supporter of having whistleblowers within the department, on all the agencies, be able to bring waste, fraud, and abuse to light, that's good for taxpayers, it's good for the American people. But then you also have this other component about how it could intersect with command authority. So what, if anything, do we need to do in Congress so that this situation doesn't happen again?
You know, there is absolutely necessity to have whistleblowers protection. If you see something wrong in the military, whether you're a commander or a private, you have an obligation to make people aware of it and take action. I think that's incumbent upon the military force. The question really is the IG. Who is he accountable to? Is he accountable to Congress? Is he accountable? Do we have a fair system where you have the three branches of equal and separate powers? Right now, I would argue that perhaps the system in place is not equal and separate powers. So I think holding the IG accountable, certainly by Congress, is a step in the right direction, and making sure there's provisions where acts conducted by a whistleblower or reprisal by a commander needs to be independently reviewed in a timely fashion. In this case, 500 days, and it wasn't just one star Admiral Losey lost, is that he lost two. And this is an admiral that I know personally that has been in the forefront of the global war on terrorism. He has served his country with great honor in some of the most sophisticated and toughest missions this country has ever had to conduct. And yet even he is subject to my judgment, an unfair process.
Great. I am about out of time, so I will yield, or I'll recognize Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
And again, I thank the gentleman for appearing before the committee and helping us with our work. It surely appears that we've done a number of iterations to try to revamp and reform the Office of the Inspector General at DOD. And it's frustrating beyond our patience here. Some have suggested that we need to put sort of an independent or an outside Inspector General on this case. Not the Losey case, but just the manner in which we're getting information from the Department of Defense. I'm sure that you know our relationship up here with some of these agencies is somewhat adversarial. We try to get information from the FBI. We try to get information from CIA, Department of Defense. Oftentimes, they play the redaction game or the waiting game with us. And it's exceedingly frustrating for us representing the American people when agencies act, beyond the control of Congress. On the other hand, whistleblowers, some people call them our first line of defense. In my opinion, they may be our first and last, because a lot of these agencies just refuse to give us information. The subpoenas, we play that subpoena game all the time on this. This is the Chief Investigatory Committee in Congress. They play that game all the time. It doesn't matter what administration, Democrat or Republican, there's still, it's like pulling teeth to get information from some of these agencies. The defense budget is classified, so it makes it even more difficult in that respect. What do you think, as a member and as someone who's working very hard on this issue, for your friend, but also for the wider interest of the American people? Do you think it's appropriate that we might adopt legislation to appoint a special independent Inspector General on DOD matters to get to the truth of this and to eliminate some of the inconsistencies and flaws in the system that may have worked against the interests of Rear Admiral Losey in this case?
Well, thank you. It's a great question. And I would say at the heart of the matter, you were absolutely right, is the law itself should be blind. And when an agency can violate the law and hide behind a stonewalling. It frustrates us all. We just want to get the truth. And maybe the answer is to look at not just this IG, but across the board. I mean, who does the IG report to? Who is he accountable to? I think we should look at perhaps having the IGs accountable to Congress, because it is only, it's our ability to be an equal and separate branch of government and have some oversight of what these agencies do. And I think we all share the same frustration is when we ask, we subpoena, we beg, is that they oftentimes don't bother to give us the information we want, or hide it, or delay it, on both sides of the aisle. And I think what happens is the American public looks at this and say, you know, it's corrupt, we're not getting the right answers. There should be a system in place where truth matters. And I would think the IGs themselves may be looking at a dual chain of command where the IGs are held accountable to Congress too, because we fund it, but it's hard to fund when you don't know where money's going, or we sit in these committees of jurisdiction and we can't get the truth.
I just want to put a finer point on this. We do have some inspectors general that are extremely responsive to the committee. I don't want to paint everybody with the broad brush, especially with what we see that has been going under the previous. We have a new interim or acting inspector general, Mr. Fine over at DOD, who seems to be getting things on track. I don't want to paint him with the same brush either. But in the past, we've had some serious difficulties there. But I think DOD has been the outlier in this case. They've been the worst in terms of the DOD operation over there within the Office of the Inspector General at DOD. That's been a real problem here. I wouldn't want to paint all the others with that same broad brush.
No, nor would I.
My time has expired. I yield back.
Well, the Chair thanks the gentleman from Montana for coming here, offering his testimony, and answering some questions. I know you have other engagements, and so you are excused, and we will do a short recess so that we can prepare the second panel. Hearing will reconvene. We'll now recognize the witnesses on our second panel. I'm pleased to welcome the Honorable Glenn Fine, Principal Deputy Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Defense, Ms. Lori Atkinson, Assistant Director of Defense Capabilities and Management at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, and Ms. Mandy Smithberger, Director of the Strauss Military Reform Project at the Project on Government Oversight. Welcome to you all. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. So if you can please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You can be seated. The witnesses answered, all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. Inspector General Fine, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to discuss the work of the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General regarding military whistleblower reprisal investigations. Whistleblowers are important to exposing waste, fraud, and abuse in government programs, and they are instrumental in saving taxpayer money and improving the efficiency of government operations. They need to be protected from reprisals for their protected disclosures. Without such protections, individuals who can help save taxpayer money and possibly even save lives may not report crucial information about wrongdoing and waste. The DoD OIG therefore seeks to conduct thorough, fair, and timely investigations into allegations of whistleblower reprisal. It is a challenging task, particularly given the burgeoning whistleblower reprisal caseload and our flat level of resources. However, we are committed to this critically important mission, and we regularly consider how to improve our program. First, with regard to the stated purpose of this hearing and the two GAO reports, it is important to note, as GAO stated in its testimony, that the GAO has already closed and implemented 15 out of 18 recommendations from both its 2012 and 2015 reports. The 3 final recommendations are in the progress of being implemented. That is significant progress. However, I also want to point out additional steps and progress we have made toward improving whistleblower reprisal investigations, even beyond what GAO has recommended. We provided training in whistleblower reprisal investigations to our OIG employees, as well as to over 1,000 personnel from DoD component IGs and other federal OIGs. We issued guidance to DoD component IGs to properly notify complainants when military whistleblower reprisals will not be completed within 180 days. We deployed the Defense Case Activity Tracking System within the OIG for transmitting, storing, and retrieving data and documents, and for managing and monitoring investigations. We developed an automated alert to help ensure compliance with the statutory notification requirement to provide service members with accurate information regarding the status of their reprisal investigations within 180 days. This automated alert was implemented in April 2016, and we are providing such notices. With regard to the 3 remaining GAO recommendations, the GAO recommended that we regularly report to Congress on the timeliness of military whistleblower reprisal investigations. We agree with the benefit of providing regular reports to Congress on the timeliness of such investigations, and we will do so regularly. We will provide the first such report on October 31st, 2016. We are also taking steps to implement the remaining 2 GAO recommendations, including working with the Secretary of Defense to standardize whistleblower reprisal investigations throughout the Department. In addition to these initiatives, I want to highlight other significant improvements we have made to our program. I have elevated the importance of the role of our Whistleblower Protection Ombudsman by making it a full-time GS-15 position rather than a collateral duty. I have made clear that we should be expansive in our interpretation of whistleblower protection statutes. I have promoted the need for greater transparency in the outcomes of whistleblower reprisal and other OIG administrative investigations. In particular, at my direction, we obtained a change to our Privacy Act Systems of Records notice, and we are now proactively releasing the results of investigations when the public's right to know outweighs the individual's privacy rights, even before the receipt of a FOIA request. We have decided to handle all DoD reprisal cases stemming from reporting of sexual assault. We created a dedicated investigative unit to investigate these sexual assault reprisal cases. We are instituting an alternative dispute resolution program, like that administered by OSC, to pursue settlement of whistleblower cases separate and apart from the investigation process. This voluntary program can help reduce the cost and time for resolving certain whistleblower cases, and it can allow limited investigative resources to be allocated to completing investigations in a timely manner. Finally, I want to emphasize that a critical responsibility for the OIG when conducting whistleblower reprisal investigations is to follow the facts wherever they lead. If the evidence shows that an individual has been reprised against, we need to conduct that investigation fully, fairly, timely, and substantiate the allegation. By the same token, if the evidence shows that the subject of the complaint did not reprise against the complainant, we need to find that and clear the subject in a timely manner. Both missions are important. I also recognize that we are likely to receive criticism from either or both sides in the case, and the investigation regarding Rear Admiral Loesley, mentioned by Representative Zinke, it is an example of where disagreements can arise. But such criticism should not deter us from reaching objective conclusions based on the evidence. That is what we strive to do, and the measures that I have described are designed to improve our processes to meet that goal. In sum, conducting whistleblower reprisal investigations is a critically important part of the OIG's work, and we are committed to continuously improving how we handle these challenging duties. That concludes my statement, and I would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Atkinson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss DoD Inspector General's progress on improving its whistleblower reprisal program for military service members. Let me briefly summarize my statement. Whistleblowers play an important role in safeguarding the federal government against waste, fraud, and abuse, and their willingness to come forward can contribute to improvements in government operations. However, whistleblowers also risk reprisal, such as demotion, reassignment, and firing. We found in our recent reports that DoD IG oversight of military whistleblower reprisal program faced challenges. For example, we found that DoD IG was not consistently or accurately recording key dates to track the length of investigations, did not report the timeliness of its investigations to Congress, had outdated guidance about the process, and had not established performance metrics to ensure the quality of its investigations. My statement today is primarily based on GAO's February 2012 and May 2015 reports that contained 18 recommendations to DoD to improve tracking investigation timeliness and strengthening oversight of the military services investigations. For this statement, we followed up with DoD IG officials to determine what actions they had taken in response to the recommendations we made. There are 3 main points from my statement I would like to discuss here. First, DoD IG has made progress and taken action to address our recommendations to improve its tracking of timeliness and to strengthen its oversight of investigations. For example, in our recent report, we found that DoD did not meet the statutory requirement to notify service members within 180 days about delays, and about half of the reprisal investigations closed in fiscal year 2013. In response, DoD developed an automated tool in its case management system to flag investigations that were approaching 180 days. Second, DoD has not taken action to regularly report to Congress on the timeliness of its investigations, nor on the frequency and type of corrective actions taken in response to substantiated reprisal claims. DoD IG reports some corrective actions in its semi-annual report to Congress, but that reporting does not include all corrective actions nor address outstanding corrective action recommendations. We continue to believe that without such information, Congress will be hindered in its ability to provide oversight of the corrective actions portion of military whistleblower reprisal program. I would also like to note that just last week, we received a letter from DoD IG stating that it plans to begin reporting the timeliness of investigations to Congress on a biannual basis. We are encouraged by this step and look forward to the first report this fall. Finally, we found that DoD IG and the military service IGs use different terms in their guidance to refer to their investigations, which hindered DoD IG's ability to consistently classify and assess the completeness of cases during oversight reviews. For example, DoD IG investigators miscoded approximately 43% of the cases that DoD IG closed in fiscal year 2013 as full investigations when the service reports indicated they were preliminary inquiries. In 2015, we recommended that the Secretary of Defense, in coordination with DoD IG, direct the military services to follow standardized investigation stages and issue guidance to clarify how the stages are defined. DoD concurred with this recommendation and subsequently updated its guide. However, this guide is characterized as best practices. We continue to believe that by directing the services to follow standardized investigation stages, DoD IG will be better able to ensure consistent program implementation and consistent treatment of service member complaints. In summary, Mr. Chairman, DoD has taken actions to implement the majority of the recommendations we made to address timeliness and oversight challenges we identified. Fully implementing our other recommendations would further strengthen DoD IG's capacity to assess the quality of military investigations and enhance Congress's visibility into timeliness as well as corrective actions taken for substantiated allegations. We look forward to continuing to work with DoD IG on our ongoing work, which is focused on reprisal investigations of DoD civilians and contractors. That concludes my remarks, and I'll be pleased to take any questions that you and the members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Smithberger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman DeSantis and Ranking Member Lynch, for inviting me here today. The Project on Government Oversight was founded by Pentagon whistleblowers concerned about overpriced and ineffective weapons. From our founding, we've been concerned about protecting military, civilian, intelligence, and contractor whistleblowers. The Department of Defense Inspector General is supposed to work with and protect whistleblowers, but a number of reports, including the GAO report issued last year, raised serious concerns. POGO has also heard directly from whistleblowers within DoD-IG. To hear from whistleblowers from an IG shop is rare, and to hear from so many is unprecedented. An attorney who represents several of them would be happy to meet with the committee if you'd like more information. The concerns of these whistleblowers are echoed in OPM survey data. That data shows that a quarter of DoD-IG employees said they felt that they could not disclose a suspected violation of law, rule, or regulation without fear of reprisal. Nearly half said they didn't think their leadership maintains high standards of honesty and integrity. This is double the rate reported by DoD employees. DoD-IG should be a model agency, and this kind of survey data raises serious concerns. In March, we sent a letter to Principal Deputy IG Glenn Fine raising concerns about timeliness of investigations, a toxic culture towards whistleblowers, and insufficient transparency for military reprisal investigations. Our letter raised concerns that managers in the IG's Administrative Investigations Division, who conduct reprisal investigations across the department, had backfilled case files to try to mislead GAO investigators. We have also raised concerns about DoD-IG's rate of dismissal. DoD-IG dismissed without full investigation 86% of the military whistleblower cases it received in the past 4 years. We were surprised that this rate was more than double that for the service IGs, who are traditionally considered to be less independent. DoD-IG substantiated only 1% of the cases during this period. Frankly, things are bad for most whistleblowers who come to DoD-IG. DoD-IG substantiated only 7 out of over 1,300 complaints received from civilians and contractors. Those rates are about half of what we have seen for federal employee whistleblowers at the Office of Special Counsel. Low investigation and low substantiation rates create the appearance the office is focused on closing rather than investigating the cases it receives. The high dismissal rates may be in part due to changes by DoD-IG to reduce cycle time by automatically closing cases within 10 days if whistleblowers do not provide additional information. While we agree with the committee that timeliness is important, we worry this timeline is too short, since service members may be deployed, disabled, or otherwise limited in their ability to access documents in a timely manner. Striking the balance between timeliness and quality is extremely difficult, and we appreciate that, but both must be a focus of this committee's oversight. We are also concerned DoD-IG is not consistently talking to whistleblowers before dismissing cases in violation of their own procedures. Talking to whistleblowers not only helps that investigation, but it also prevents DoD-IG from unknowingly exposing whistleblowers to additional retaliation by referring their complaints back to the entities that they were initially reporting on. We are also concerned about whether whistleblower laws are consistently and fairly applied. A 2011 internal review found that DoD-IG's own investigators disagreed about the decision to dismiss a case 68% of the time. Investigators disagreed with each other on substantiating cases 47% of the time. The GAO's review mentioned other problems as well with the case management system, specifically finding that key case documents were submitted after cases were closed for 77% of the cases closed in 2013, and that key case variables like dates and results to show whether a case was fully investigated were changed in 83% of the cases in fiscal year 2014. The problems may be even worse than those found by GAO, since DoD-IG managers told investigators to stand down on other work to backfill cases. Internal emails shared with POGO showed that managers instructed investigators to work on or amend older information about that was the focus of the GAO review, and raises concerns about those managers, since changing these records likely had a significant impact on the GAO's findings. Separately, and in the broader picture, POGO is most troubled by the role of IG General Counsel Henry Shelley. Since sending our letter in March, OSC has found there is a substantial likelihood of truth to allegations the IG improperly destroyed files in a major whistleblower case. These allegations are now being investigated by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. This is only the latest of various allegations that have come to public attention, that Mr. Fine's top legal advisor engages in a systemic practice of improperly interfering with and undermining personnel investigations. For example, a POGO investigation found that top legal advisor to one of Mr. Fine's predecessors, Mr. Shelley, helped direct a process that permanently suppressed the findings of a team of IG investigators regarding top officials of the Department of Defense, including the Secretary of Defense. In my written testimony, I've included a list of recommendations that POGO believes would enhance and strengthen military whistleblower protections, which I would be happy to discuss during Q&A. Whistleblowers who report concerns that affect our national security must be lauded, not shunned or worse harmed, and the law must protect them. The perceived and real failures of the DoD IG to act as a check on violations of law should be of grave concern. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. So, Mr. Fine, there's statements making that there's so many of these cases, very few of them are substantiated. I think the implicit criticism, perhaps from our witness here, is that you guys just aren't doing your job, that there are these cases that are just not being substantiated, and that may be the case. But I also look at it and say, well, maybe those ones that are dismissed are being dismissed properly, and then we have an awful lot of people that are filing these that can't be substantiated. So how would you respond to the ratio issue that you get a lot of complaints, you don't substantiate very many?
Well, that's a very good question. I appreciate the opportunity to answer that question. First, with regard to the data, I don't think the data is really accurate, because when you talk about 86% being substantiated, POGO includes in that the amount that we were referring to the services for them to investigate. So not 86% are not dismissed. A big portion of them are referred for investigation. As I said in my statement, our job is to take the facts wherever they lead. And if it's substantiated in our view, we should do that. And if it's not, we shouldn't. And we are going to get criticized from both sides. You're too hard, you're too soft. You're doing a whitewash, you're doing a witch hunt. You're a junkyard dog, you're a lap dog. You get that often in the same case. We can't let that deter us. We have to look at the evidence and look at the facts, and we take each case on its merits, and we try and follow them through. It is a challenging task. It is a challenging task to determine if there really was retaliation or whether it was an unfair allegation of reprisal. And we look for the evidence, and we take it where it leads. That's our job, and that's what I try to describe how we're trying to improve our processes.
And part of the reason why you may get criticism from both sides is because this process of substantiation, there's a lot of subjectivity to that. Commander Zinke was very critical of the report involving Rear Admiral Losey. I have read those reports. I have not read some of the other cases that have been cited here, but I will say that it struck me looking at Losey's case that you had the Navy investigate it. They said that there was legitimate command reasons to take some of these decisions. The DoD IG obviously came to different conclusions in some of the findings. The Chief of Naval Operations took all that into consideration and said that while he should not have been complaining about the initial false report, his actions were justified. And I guess my question is with the level of subjectivity, as I read the report for DoD on Losey, for example, I mean, there were certain decisions that were made that were very much just reading it in a light that was probably least favorable to him. I mean, for example, and I'm not going to name the complainants, but one of the complainants testified that Losey told him that he did not suspect him of being the original whistleblower. When Losey testified, he said he did not suspect the complainant from being the original whistleblower, but the complainant said, well, his body language suggested that I was, that he thought I was it, and the IG basically concluded that he was, that was one of the reasons why he was being found. There's another issue of about one of the admin officers was given not the highest, but the second highest grade in terms of his evaluation, and the IG report was critical of the commander for not doing an improvement plan. But a lot of people I've talked to in defense would say that that's too high a rating to necessitate an improvement plan. So I guess the question is how do you ensure objectivity and a consistent standard when you're determining what is substantiated and what is not?
Well, you look at the standard and you apply that standard to the facts, and you don't rely on one piece of evidence, whether it's body language. We do report what people say, but that's not the significant piece of evidence that would conclude us allow us to conclude that there was retaliation. We look at all the evidence, we put it in the report so that people can make their own judgments. We did look at all the evidence in this case. It was a case before my time, but I looked at it, and it seemed a pretty strong case to me, including the language that Admiral Losey had repeatedly speculated on who made the complaint against him, focusing on the complainants and a few others, asking his staff to find out who made the complaint, and then saying he would find out why they did this and cut the head off the snake and end it. And that's what the evidence indicated happened. Now, I don't want to necessarily...
One witness said he said that, but he denied saying that,
He denied
correct?
saying that, and other witnesses said that he asked to find out who did it and asked them to go find out who did it, and that they actually did. And they told him, let it go. As a commander, you're going to get complaints. Just let it go. But he didn't. And we talked about the CDI, you know, as Representative Zinke talked about. Well, the CDI was initiated after he had taken actions against the complainant. And if you read the CDI, it does not fully support those actions. And so you know, it is a hard thing. And there are professional disagreements. There's often disagreements within our own organization. That's why you need to review it and carefully assess the evidence and reach appropriate conclusions. And then lay it out for people. Lay it out for people so that they can make their own determinations. I think that's the most important thing. You may disagree, others may agree. I think it's important that we fully and fairly investigate it, and I think we did in this case.
What about the using whistleblower complaints in order to resist changes in a military command? I think this is a different issue than we would face in virtually all the other whistleblower complaints in other agencies. And I realize there's a different standard for military complaints, but here you had an initial complaint against Admiral Losey that was just factually false. Right. He paid out of his own pocket for his daughter, but even if he didn't, he still would have been following the law. And then I would say the complaint about there being a toxic climate is negated by the review that had been done by SOC Africa or by AFRICOM about what they were doing to change the culture. So is there a penalty if somebody is using that in an inappropriate way? And I know with the numbers, and I think you made a good point about that, but clearly there are a significant number of complaints that are made that are just not substantiated. And while we want to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, I don't want to burden a military commander with having to fend off some of this stuff if there's no underlying basis to it.
Right, and they ought to then let the investigators do their job without conducting their own investigation, without trying to find out.
I understand that, but what is there any problem with somebody using this inappropriately to blow a whistle when there's really no foul created?
If one can show that they did so without good faith and knowing that it was intentionally false, yes, action can be taken. That's a hard standard.
What action would be? That would be an administrative action?
That would be an administrative action, yeah.
Okay.
That's a hard standard to prove, I got to tell you that. And you do not want to, in my view, start chilling whistleblowers from bringing forward good faith allegations, even if they're not true. If they have a good faith basis for it, they ought to be able to come forward and we ought to investigate the underlying thing, and their ability to do that shouldn't be infringed upon. Now, I understand that that's difficulty, and we have it in our own organization, as was pointed out, and we seek to have full and fair investigations of it. Pogo was talking about the allegations against Mr. Shelley. Mr. Shelley adamantly disputes them, adamantly. Came to me, and instead of sweeping it on the rug, I decided, you know what, let's get an outside investigation, an independent investigation of this, and we'll take it wherever it leads, and we'll address it. And I think it's unfair to think that he's guilty before it's done, but it's also important to investigate it, and that's what we do, and it is difficult, but that's what you have to do, and that's what we did in this case. And so we will wait the outcome of the investigation and take appropriate action, whatever it finds.
My time is up. Chairman, I'll recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes. If he needs more, he can take more.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The GAO report indicates that the rate of dismissal, though, at the DOD IG is far in excess of what it is for other services. 85% of the cases dismissed. So I'm reading from the GAO report. They compared not yours because you weren't there. You weren't in that position, but your predecessor. The DOD IG closed 364 senior official cases, so we're comparing senior officials when they're charged versus, rank and file. But in those cases where senior officers had been, or senior officials had been complained of, in your investigations, you only investigated 27 out of 364, and then substantiated only 5. But you closed 364 cases. In contrast, when we look at the other services and component IGs, they closed 250 senior official cases. They investigated all 250 of them and substantiated 90. So it just doesn't look right in terms of the mix there.
Yeah, can I respond?
Let me, we're going to give you plenty of time.
Sure.
Okay, I got a couple of other things here I want to ask you as well. The practice of backfilling, adding, this is the case management system. Yeah. Adding documents after the case has closed or in advance of the GAO or POGO's investigation. Sort of, adding evidence to the case after the verdict has already been rendered. When you took over, did you tell people you can't do this? Did you explain to people that?
What, Congressman Lynch, when I took over, I wanted to get to the bottom of this because I heard this allegation, and the reality is it was not backdating in the sense that you're talking about it. What it is, we were transitioning from a paper-based system to an electronic system, and we had to put that information in there, in the electronic system. There were also additional fields.
But here's the deal. Here's the deal.
GAO know about it.
You dismissed this case, though.
Which case?
This case right here, figuratively.
Okay.
You dismissed this case, said it was not warranted.
Right.
Okay. Then you got evidence after the case was closed, and you put the evidence in there.
No, we had evidence in there, and then we put it into the database system, all of it.
And you put it
we
back?
we let GAO know it, and they were aware of it, and this is in accord with their data reliability thing.
Well, let's talk to GAO then. And POGO. Explain to me this. I read both reports, GAO and POGO report, and it appears to me that it alleges that there's backfilling of documents to files, and they're also being mislabeled as investigated when they weren't investigated. So let's take those two instances where there's backfilling, that's how it's described here, of new documents in files after they're dismissed. And secondly, there are cases that are labeled investigated when they're really not.
So for the first I'll talk about the labeling the investigations, and that gets to the heart of our recommendation about standardizing the guidance for the military services, and we think that was part of the problem, because when the DoD IG went in to oversee, there was differences in how the services were doing this, and therefore it led to the 43% that I pointed out being mislabeled as full investigations when they were actually preliminary inquiries. So we continue to believe that by the IG working with the Secretary of Defense to standardize the guidance, that would help better help resolve that problem.
You think so, Mr. Fine?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That was the issue, that they have preliminary investigation that took forever, and our folks
Right.
had to figure out where to put that in. It definitely would help if we have standardization.
So the statute says 180 days, and we're doing 526 or something like that?
Well, the statute says we have to, if we don't complete the investigation within 180 days, provide a notice to the complainant and the responsible management officials that we haven't completed it and the reasons why. It doesn't say you have to complete it within 180 days.
Right. But you got to let somebody know, right?
Exactly, and we weren't doing that. We are doing that now. We have
Okay.
an automated alert. It's based on their recommendation.
All right, let's go to backfilling, and I appreciate that, Mr. Fine, and I don't intend to, I only have limited time, so I don't mean to cut you off.
I understand.
But Ms. Smithberger or Ms. Atkinson, can we talk about backfilling, about documents going into the files?
Yes, sir. When we reported in our 2015 report, was that the DoD IG personnel uploaded key case documents after cases closed, and 77% of the cases closed for fiscal year 2013. DoD IG staff made changes to case variables after cases were closed, and 83% of the cases closed in fiscal year 2013. And this was based on our case file review that we did, where we took a random sample of cases and had analysts go in and review and look for certain documentation and so forth.
Okay. You think they were trying to mislead Congress or mislead GAO?
Sir, I can't speak to the intent or
All
how
right,
that
Ms.
came about.
Smithberger, can you speak to that?
The whistleblowers that we've spoken to do feel like the intent was to mislead the GAO.
Okay, all right. I'm short on time. Let me just say this in closing. I don't expect the Department of Defense to be run like a charm school. I understand the culture there. It's by rank, it's by command. There's a healthy impetus to follow orders. But in cases like this, where we may have people engaging in illegal or certainly misconduct on some level, you do want to have your personnel feel that they can report, that they can blow the whistle. And we want to protect that right because, as I said in my opening statement, there's a lot of concealment going on. It's very difficult to get information. So we rely, unfortunately, we have to rely heavily on whistleblowers to tell us when things are going wrong at some of these agencies. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fine, let me begin with you and just try to get some clarification. According to the testimony that we've been given, the DODIG automatically closes a case within 10 days. Is that not right?
That is not right. What the issue is if we are trying to get in touch with a complainant and the complainant drops off the screen and we can't get in touch with them, we've tried several times, again and again, finally we'll send them a letter, a 10-day letter, and say, if you don't get back to us, we're going to close the case. We issued one 27 times in 4 years, 27 times in 4 years, and in those cases, 8 of them responded, and we continue with the case, and the others never responded, and we close the case. It is a prudent management tool if after a long period of time the complainants do not contact you, do not respond to your calls, it's important to close that case if they're not willing to go forward. And
So how long do they have before they get the 10-day letter?
they have at least several times where we contact them repeatedly and ask them to get in touch with us, and if they persistently do not get back to us, not in a short period of time, but over extended period of time, we'll eventually send a letter saying, look, if you don't get back to us, we're going to close
So
the
what
case.
kind of time do you give them in between letters? In other words, if someone is deployed, if
Yes.
someone's engaged, but what?
We absolutely are aware of that and give them time and give them, I can't give you an exact figure, but our investigators know to give them significant time, and it's only when they repeatedly won't get back to us.
So you don't have a policy as to how, so who determines how frequently you try to reach out to them?
Well, we're constantly reaching out to them because without them, we can't go
All right,
forward.
constantly, what does that mean? I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. My understanding was 10 days. You're saying 10 days is the final.
It's the final
after,
thing,
after
exactly.
multiple previous
Exactly.
attempts. So what's the time frame in which these attempts are made?
I can't give you a specific number. I don't have a metric, but I believe it's months.
Okay.
And if somebody then says, I was deployed, we will reopen that case. That's not an issue.
Ms. Atkinson, do you believe there's room for improvement on this, just kind of what appears to me a rather nebulous policy?
We did not specifically look at that, but I will tell you that in our ongoing work looking at civilians and contractors, we are going to be looking at dismissals and substantiation rates, and so we may have more insight into that.
Okay, let's go back, Mr. Fine, to you again. Came up a moment ago about standardization. Where are we in that process?
Well, we are working with the service IGs to try and implement standardized processes. They all, not all, but some of them do it different ways. Preliminary investigations, how they do things. We believe it's appropriate to have a standardized process that will allow us to do things in a timely way and in a standardized way. Having said that, the recommendation from GAO was to have the Secretary of Defense issue directive to ensure that that happens, and in some sense that's the only way it will happen, and we're willing to work with the Secretary of Defense to try and pursue standardization. That will take time, as you probably know. Getting a directive in the Department of Defense is not an easy thing, but in the interim we are trying to voluntarily get them to standardize processes. And we have a working group set up where we meet with them and try and implement that.
Do you think it'll happen,
I hope so. I think so.
Ms. Atkinson?
We certainly hope so. We think that's a key recommendation, and they have been working with a working group, and they did change the guide, but the guide, again, is best practices, and we do believe it should be directed.
Do you believe we can make that happen?
I hope that they can.
Okay. All right, so you have multiple attempts to reach out to these service members. Right now, the reprisal investigation is, it was 526 days now. It's been shortened.
Right.
But technically, the statute says 180 days.
Well, the statute says if you don't complete it in 180 days, you have to notify them that it's not completed and about the delay. So it doesn't require you to complete it within 180 days. Having said that, we do agree it should be shortened. We are seeking to shorten it. In fiscal year, I think 2014, it was over 500 days. In fiscal year 2015, it was 300 days for our investigations. That's still too long. We're trying to shorten it.
So there's no consequences except to the service person for this going far beyond 180 days. And you can continue to prolong it so long as you keep notifying. There's no dead end to this thing.
We don't, yes, we intend to do this as quickly as possible. The consequences are we're held accountable in these kinds of hearings. And I would say this, too. I wrote it in my written statement. You know, there is a burgeoning caseload in whistleblowers. It is dramatically increased. We have not dramatically increased our resources. We are doing more with less. I believe as an IG, we ought to be commensurate with the Department of Defense. If they grow, we ought to grow. If they're stable, we ought to be stable. If they're constricted, we ought to constrict. If you look at the last 20 years, the Department of Defense has grown dramatically. We haven't. If we had simply kept pace with them, we would have 500 more employees. We would be able to do these with more resources rather than giving our investigators lots and lots of cases to work on. And I think that would inure to everybody's benefit. Everybody's.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired now. I appreciate that, but it seems to me that the servicemen and women are suffering the longer this goes on. They are the only ones suffering. Everyone else gets a pass, but they are the ones that take a kick in the gut. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The importance of whistleblowers cannot be overstated. Whistleblowers in the Department of Defense has the unique ability to expose fraud and waste in an agency that spends over $500 billion of taxpayer dollars a year, and that accounts for almost a third of the programs on the GAO high-risk list. More importantly, DOD whistleblowers save lives. I want to be very clear about that. So this discussion we're having is very serious. Courageous whistleblowers like Mr. Coleman or Mr. Gale, both Marines, come forward often at a great personal cost in order to protect others. Ms. Atkinson, GAO has remarked that the DOD's culture does not encourage whistleblowing. Can you explain why?
We reported in our 2015 report a statistic from the OPM's Federal Viewpoint Survey that talked about that, and that was the where that information came from. And there were two statistics, and one was for overall service members, and I think that was something like 1 in 5 service members felt that they would be able to provide a complaint. And then the second one was a higher percentage, and that was for members of the Office of the Inspector General. So that was not an original GAO survey. That was an information that we had found in an OPM survey. As far as the culture and so forth, we think that continued oversight of the program is important, reporting to Congress on timeliness and corrective actions, monitoring the initial performance metrics that they've established for timeliness and completeness, and then, of course, importantly, reporting the corrective actions, because corrective actions can demonstrate the results of the investigations and offer hope to future whistleblowers and deter future incidents, maybe.
I have a short period of time. Mr. Fine, having worked in HR, you whistleblow when you're not heard. you whistleblow when there is a culture that when something is wrong, you're just supposed to do it and not have input. Mr. Fine, just briefly, because I'm limited, tell me why whistleblowing has become a protected and defined activity or a culture that we are now having this hearing. Can you address that? What is the culture that we now have to develop processes to protect whistleblowers versus a culture that embraces the ability to empower people to have input on their jobs?
Well, I think the ideal would be to have people have input in their jobs and feel as if they can go to their management would take appropriate action, and that is what managers and leaders strive to do. Is it always possible? I don't think so, and I also think that some whistleblowers don't believe that their management will take appropriate action or believe it's appropriate to bring it to other people's attention. And
Is there any action to address that?
Well, we do have whistleblower ombudsmen who educate people about their rights and responsibilities, both the rights of whistleblowers to be protected, the responsibilities of managers not to reprise against them, where they can go to provide whistleblower disclosures, what the processes are. I think it is important to educate people about the overall environment for whistleblowers.
Ms. Atkinson, which of your recommendations is tailored to get the high number of dismissals back in line with other service IGs?
To get the high number of dismissals back in line, I think that,
Because you said it was higher than others, so what is the plan?
oh, that's actually POGO.
Okay.
If I may interrupt, let me provide some
Okay.
clarification. So we're not necessarily sure what the right rate of dismissal should be, but we think that it would be good to do another review to make sure that DODIG is consistently following its own policies and the law to appropriately dismiss cases when they should be dismissed and appropriately investigating cases when they should be investigated.
Mr. Fine, will you commit to us today that you will improve the current problems? We seem to be real good at outlining what the problems are with this whistleblower reprisal investigation. You did state that you feel that there is an issue with resources. With that being heard, what is your commitment?
Oh, yes, we are trying, and I can commit to you, we are seeking to improve the processes with all the measures that I described in my statement.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it is important, and we are continuously seeking to improve.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. But Ms. Smithberg, what is the right percentage of people? I mean, I don't understand. I mean, the military is a different culture. Who's to say that it should be the same as the others?
It might not be. We just want to make sure that everyone is consistently following the same law. We get concerned when we see substantiation rates that are as low as 1% or less than 1%, because that seems to send the message that there aren't really any credible whistleblowers that have been reprised against. And we see that those numbers are much lower than we've seen for OSC. One of the great things that DODIG does is that they do report what happens to all of these cases. We wish that all of the IGs would do so that we could ask the same kinds of questions, and we really appreciate their transparency on this.
All right, the chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have in front of me an article from the New York Times slightly over 3 months ago, and it says, "Whistleblower beware." And it starts off and it says, "Should it be a crime to report a crime? Many top officials in Washington seem to think so, at least in the case of Edward Snowden." And it goes on to say that Secretary Clinton said that Edward Snowden would have gotten all the protections of a whistleblower, but it says Thomas Drake would disagree, so would John Crane. And this article tells how these cases were all intertwined. It says the federal judge handling the case against Drake blasted prosecutors for putting Mr. Drake through 4 years of hell. said Mr. Snowden followed the Drake case closely in the news media and drew the obvious conclusion going through channels was worse than a dead end. And then it tells how Mr. Crane was tied into that, because it says Mr. Crane argues that the Defense Department broke the law in Mr. Drake's case, and then he was dismissed. So I would like to ask all three of you, or any of the three of you who would like to comment, if you have studied that situation and how those cases are all tied in together, and what you have to say about these really accusations in this New York Times story, that it's a dangerous thing for a whistleblower to come forward. Mr. Fine, we'll start with you.
Yeah. I think that I don't want to comment on the Drake case or the Crane case. Some aspects of it are still open, and I don't want to impair that in any way. I will say that it is important that whistleblowers believe and that they know that if they do come forward, that they will be protected from reprisal, and that there will be a full and fair and timely investigation done of that. That's an important issue. That's what we're striving to do. That's why we're striving to improve our programs.
All right. Any of the do the gentleladies here know? Are you familiar with these cases that this New York Times article has written about?
No, sir, we did not look at specific cases. We did more case file analysis and made generalizable observations about the process and guidance and stuff. Related to this, I guess, would be that we did report in 2015 that the substantiation rates for both DOD and IG and the service investigations were both under 10%. And this is also related to, I think, the importance of our recommendation about the need to report corrective actions and how that can benefit whistleblowers.
All right, Ms. Smith-Berger.
The Drake case did send a message to a number of whistleblowers that if you go through the right channels, you're still likely to have your career ended as a consequence. And so people refer to that case frequently. In particular, there are concerns about DOD IG's role in turning over Drake to recommend him being prosecuted under the Espionage Act. So DOD IG has a very difficult role in both trying to enforce laws and work with whistleblowers, but we do think that that created a chilling effect.
Mr. Fine, do you think, is there anything at all that you think the Department of Defense could or should be doing to make or to give encouragement to whistleblowers to come forward that they're not doing now?
I think along the lines of what we've been talking about, to the extent we can standardize processes, we can improve programs, we can provide adequate resources so that the cases will be done in a more timely fashion. I'm not only talking about resources for us, but for the service IGs. Service IGs do a significant number of these cases, and when they're not adequately resourced either, then the cases languish, and it's a difficult task and challenge for them. I think reflecting the importance of whistleblowers and the need for everybody, both the complainants as well as the subjects whose careers are on hold while the case is going, is important to do these in a timely way, and it's important to adequately resource them. So I think that's a critical factor.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit this article from the New York Times called Whistleblower Beware to be entered into the record at this point, and I yield back.
Without objection, it shall be so ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fine, how many whistleblower reprisal investigations have there been, like maybe 2015, 2014, 2013? Do you know each year?
I don't know the exact numbers. We can certainly get you the statistics. There are hundreds of them.
Every year?
Yes. If you count the ones done by DOD OIG, as well as the ones that we refer to the service.
Is there one service that sort of stands out? Most of them, no?
They all have them.
Equal.
They all have them.
And then I saw the time of resolving these cases, and that some of that's been discussed. they put in law that, I guess it is in law, the 120, is that 120-day goal or?
180.
Or by rule?
It's a law, after 180 days, you have to notify the complainant if it's going to be delayed beyond that, as well as the responsible management officials to provide notification.
Okay, so you have hundreds of cases. How many staff do you have hearing the cases?
So we have increased the staff. If you look at the last several years, we have around 50 staff who do whistleblower reprisal cases.
So 50 staff and a couple hundred cases a year? Is that what they're handling?
Not a couple hundred for us, but 50 staff to do, well, to do the cases themselves and then the oversight of the service IG cases when they come in, when they finish their investigation and send it to us. And then the service IGs have staff as well.
One of the things I read about is the reprisal investigations. There's for each of the services, there may be different procedures. There's varying procedures, and some have recommended standardization. Maybe you could tell us what is wrong with having these variations, and then do you make the case for standardization based on those?
Well, there's a couple of reasons I would make the case for standardization. One, I think within the Department of Defense, you'll have to have a single process, and it shouldn't vary whether you are whether in the Navy, the Army,
Now that would
Air Force,
be,
or a civilian.
could that be done administratively through the Secretary?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the
So
Secretary.
the authority's there to do this, to do the standardization?
Yes, and the GAO recommended that we work with.
And you recommended, maybe, Mr. Chairman, we could also send a letter after this hearing saying that the GAO has recommended, and this hearing, the witnesses we had recommend, and we find there would be benefit, and then some fairness to everybody. It sounds like there's disparity in, again, these approaches. Is there any, also, when you have a reprisal investigation, is there any penalty against the accuser if the reprisal, the person going after them, they find it is false or there's no merit to the claim?
Not if the allegation was made in good faith, if they had a good faith belief in the allegation.
Have there been any cases where you've gone back after these people?
I don't know the answer to that in recent times, whether we've gone after people, but we, I think it would, have a pretty significant chilling effect if you start investigating the complainant.
Well, again, you don't want a chilling effect, but you don't want to use that. Mr. Duncan just read the case, and I read this, is it L-O-S-E-Y, the Brian Lucy, who was Lucy? Yeah, case, what he went through, and basically they ruined people's career, and then he got ganged by Congress on top of it, helping to ruin his reputation by some people. He was trying to do the right thing, as I understand, in his command. But you want to encourage whistleblowers, but again, there has to be some equity in the process for those who come as false accusers. I'm not sure how you craft that. Would you think that something like that would be beneficial?
I think the law, as it exists, is appropriate. That is, as long as someone makes a good faith belief, has a good faith belief that the allegations they brought forward are accurate and true. We should not hold them accountable if we then determine whether they weren't accurate or the subject did not reprise against them, because I think that would have an unbelievable chilling effect on other people.
Okay, and then we have Ms. Smithberger, and I saw in some of your testimony that your group pointed out that DOD's IG dismissal rate of 84.6% for whistleblower reprisal cases is more than double of that of Inspector Generals for the services for the same type of cases. Can you elaborate on that? That does seem like a very high rate. And what else have you found? What would you attribute that to? It does stand out. It's very
Yeah, and we think that there needs to be more evaluation as to why that's occurring, but our concern is that it creates the appearance that DODIG is more likely to dismiss a case than to investigate a case.
And did you, has your review found that to be the case, or is it?
We have. So specifically, and all of this data comes from DODIG's semi-annual reports to Congress. We have found that service IGs dismissed during the past 4 years, they investigated 53% of the cases that they received. DODIG investigated 8.2%. The services substantiated 5.9%, and DODIG substantiated 1%. And these are all military whistleblowers.
And now, I think we've got Mr. Fine, looks a little bit anxious here to respond. So could we hear your response?
Yeah, thank you
sir?
for that opportunity. This is our data, and I think that's not an accurate read of that data, because within the data, that is counting as dismissal if we refer it to the service IG. That's not a dismissal. That is referring it. So the actual cases that we retain is a much different level. Having said that, I do think the data is important. It's
Well, could you get us?
important to report, and
You
that's what
said
we
that's
do.
not accurate.
We don't
Could you
dismiss
give us
86.
to the committee, for the record, staff, we ask questions after this, but that would be something I'd like to see in the record.
Absolutely.
And also for the record, I'd like to see the number of cases, again, maybe historically the last few years that I asked the question about earlier, and then also the staffing rates. And finally, is there a budget constraint or something to pursue your work, or are you adequately funded?
We're not adequately funding. Thank you for that question. We'd be happy to provide the information that you requested, and we would be glad to do so.
Finally, since my time has expired, you could put in the response, the substantiation of the need for additional resources.
Okay. All right, fine. I'll put that in.
Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased to yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for taking the time to appear before us today. If there's no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.